let's talk about birth and the timeline of birth. So the first thing in terms of the timeline of birth is, like all natural phenomenon, there is no such thing as a due date. So a due date is only designed or invented to manage birth situations within hospital environments and otherwise managed births. So most people in the olden days would have a rough idea of the phase of pregnancy they are in, and they'd come to a point where they know at some point that pregnancy is going to end and they are going to give birth. And you can see from an anthropological data sort of describes that phase of birth might start anywhere from 36, 37 weeks onwards to 42 and even going on to 43 weeks. So as you can imagine, there's quite a range of space to play with. But in a hospital timeline, the line is drawn at 40 weeks, just to prevent any kind of deterioration of the fetus. So sometimes if it's not, something is wrong and birth is not happening because something is wrong, then having that timeline allows the medical staff to intervene rather than just keep waiting, and then if something is wrong, they've probably waited too long. So that timeline really helps in that fashion. But also on the other hand, if birth is just, everything is fine with the baby, everything is fine with the mom, then maybe take that particular date a little bit with a pinch of salt. With first time round, you might not have a good idea, or you probably won't have a good idea of what your gestation period is. Generally, it follows a familial pattern. So if your mum had shorter pregnancies and your grandmother, you're more likely to have a shorter pregnancy than 40 weeks. Or the other way around, if you've got, and also certain genetic heritage, certain communities have certain timelines. So I think the reason I'm saying all this is because one of the things that becomes quite contentious around your headspace at birth is this due date issue. So a few things will happen. You will start to expect, baby's coming, and then in most cases, I say majority of the cases, the due dates come and go with such an anticlimax, as in nothing happens. You might go to work, you might come back, and in the evening, and then, in your head, I don't know, a Thursday afternoon or whatever it was a big deal. And then it's just another Thursday afternoon, like the Wednesday afternoon. And it can play in a big way on your mind. And for a lot of people, it can also mean the beginning of, unfelt anxiety come up. So everything might be going okay and you're feeling positive about pregnancy. But if you have this timeline in your head, then suddenly that head space of yours slightly changes or dramatically changes depending on who you are. And that is not conducive to a positive birth. So maybe from that perspective, you can manage this in many different ways. So one of the things is, as I just said, it helps protect vulnerable babies and moms so that intervention can be called on earlier. But on the other hand, sometimes unnecessary interventions are created because you are going by a timeline that is not your natural timeline. So there's a give and take in there. And one way to manage that is a lot of hospitals and trusts, they offer continual monitoring of your baby. So you can go every day or whatever the timeline is. If you go over 40 weeks to get your scan literally on a daily basis to make sure that till your baby arrives, everything is still okay. And if any of the parameters of health for you or your baby changes, you can quickly make a decision of either induction, C-section, whatever the decisions are right for you, and you can go with that. So there are ways to manage this, but what you want to kind of bear in mind is that due date is something that you need to be aware of in terms of what a movable feast it is, and also to manage your expectations, because the worst, well, I wouldn't say worst, but quite a negative thing that you would do around birth time is to be anxious, because anxiety promotes a certain kind of hormonal mix in your brain, in your body, which is not the best hormonal mix for a good, calm, comfortable birth. So they kind of fight with each other. So I think following on from that same point is to move on to that. How do you keep that space of yours that is less anxiety ridden, less fearful? And this is why I talk about things like due date, because they work under your skin. You don't even know you're starting to feel anxious, but you are. And well-meaning texts start to arrive. Your mum will text you and say, how are you feeling? Or your neighbor will come round knocking on the door. And because you've told people your due date, they are all just kind of, trying to support you by being extra communicative and hoping that they'll get the news of the baby first if they get in touch with you. And all of that can build your anxiety up, because if you've chosen and your decision is to wait for natural labor to start naturally, then all these otherwise helpful text messages and visitors, etc., might remind you that actually maybe I am late, but you might not be, right? So I always say, when people haven't yet communicated their due date to anybody, I mean, obviously family is different, but you can also convey to your family that you don't want a lot of talk around the due date about the birth, and you will let them know. But I think to the wider public, I kind of sometimes advise that maybe just give a due month, So when are you due? Oh, I don't know, maybe sometime late June, something like that. And avoid yourself to keep repeating a particular date, so that a particular date might come and go and it's made no difference to you, right? It has no significant difference to make in your pregnancy journey. And I really say that in as an important part of labor. But then how do you know that labor really starts when it does? And when we explore with a lot of women after they've had their baby, interestingly, so if I ask people who've never had a baby before, tell me, how does labor start? And generally there are these kind of different, couple of standard comments. My water will break, contractions will get more intense, or I'll start to feel contractions, or something similar. But when you go a little bit more subtle and ask women or birthing people after they've had their baby, when do you think your labor started? Interestingly, they will point, a lot of them, if not all, will point at a time that precedes the contractions becoming regular, that precedes the waters going. Just a point on water: most waters don't break at the start of labor. Your water sac, it breaks towards the end of labor. There are a few exceptions, so that's more rare. But the physicality of contractions becoming more regular, they are more intense, they last longer, they build up in a kind of a certain set pattern, is your physical understanding of labor. But before all of that, there's a bit of labor that happens in the head, in the body, that is unrecognizable from a traditional pain perspective. So what I mean by that is you'll hear stories of people who will say, oh yeah, it was funny, I don't know, maybe a day or two before labor, I was just not interested in anything. Or it's funny, I never have a bath, but I don't know, I ran a bath. Or they will say things like, oh, it was so silly towards the end of my pregnancy. I remember I put my keys in the fridge. Or, all those versions of being forgetful and things like that. And if you go into the evidence, that's what's really happening to your brain. Your brain is now so geared up for this one particular massive major event in your life that all other things like where should the keys live are so immaterial to you. And you suddenly become less interested in the outside world. You become a lot more, we actually have a technical term for this. It's called maternal preoccupation. So mums become preoccupied with not the birth, but preoccupied with a space that lives inside of them rather than external stuff. So they might be watching television, they might be, you might be reading a book or DVD, whatever. But actually, if someone quizzed you, what did you just read in the last 2 pages? You might not be able to tell them. Or what is this movie about? You might not be able to tell them. And these are the kind of narratives that people talk about just preceding that whole contractions, experiencing contractions and things like that. And again, I bring this up in a birth preparation workshop. I bring this up a lot for the partners as well. So I kind of say that if you find your partner just kind of in the middle of lunch, staring into middle distance, or have not paid attention to something important that you've been talking about, or suddenly standing up, picking up the plates, tidying up, or, there's very random things that are not like her, or going away in the room and just kind of being by herself. And when you knock on the door and you say, are you okay? And they might say, yeah, I just want to be alone. And you might feel quite anxious then, because especially if that is not their style as normal people, you might feel even more anxious. I mean, if people like, there are lots of people who just like being by themselves. They do it normally, and that might go unnoticed for them. But especially personalities who don't tend to do these things normally, partners tend to get really worried at that time. And I always say to the partners that if you knew that this was a normal, or in fact, even if you knew that actually this is the real deal and this is how birth begins, you might not, if anything, you'll start preparing in a different way. You might not feel anxious. And it's probably, again, quite counterproductive to knock on the door every 10 minutes and say, are you still okay? Because this person just wants to really not answer and have chats with the external world. So actually protecting her space that she naturally wants is one of the best things you can do as a birth partner. So do become her mouth. If somebody else, she might, you might have a conversation with your partner and say that they are welcome to reply to certain texts that are birth related. Say if mom or mom-in-law kind of text, you allow your partner to respond back to a standard response like, we'll let you know, or she's okay right now but she doesn't want to talk, whatever it is, that however you want to communicate. But you, the partner, can become that mouthpiece, and that means you are protecting the physiological space that the birthing parent will feel like they want to be in. So that is really a good indication of things are going to ramp up. Like everybody and all of us individually, that one, it's not going to be the same. Maternal preoccupation does not look the same for all of us. For some people, they can barely notice it. For some people, it's a huge deal. This whole idea of staying at home, cleaning the whole house and making everything, it becomes huge. And if you point out that it's quite absurd what they're doing, they will find it quite annoying. And for some people, life just moves on normally, but it might be happening at a level that they haven't experienced consciously. So again, there are lots and lots of different variations in people's experiences of this stage of labor. But what I really want you to hopefully kind of keep in mind that this is actually a stage of labor or a stage of end of pregnancy. It's that gray area where your pregnancy is finishing and birth is imminent. And if you know about this, like we are talking right now, it's great, because you will start to recognize these things, and you will either go with the flow or not feel like something's going on, right? So for a lot of people who are only think about these things in hindsight, they always say, oh yeah, I wish I'd actually known that was how my labor is going to start. I would have not been so worried about ignoring my children, for example. So if you have other kids, you might become a little bit less interested in what dress they wear or something like that, and you might put them in the wrong uniform in school. And what you will do is take that in your stride, saying, oh, of course, that's what happens to my brains. I am now totally focused on the birth, because it is going to be intense, it's going to be massive, and it's going to be epic. Having your kid in the wrong uniform in school compares not at all in the grand scheme of things. So you look at it differently. And then after that period, things start to become a bit more physical. And once more, there is such a variation when it comes to what that physicality feels like in early labor. But the common thread is now your body is physically trying to get the baby out. So the best way I talk about labor is to get out of the way. So what do I mean by that? I mean by that is that having a certain kind of trust and faith in your body, and that's mind work you will have to do. It's not something that you can read in a book or listen to, what I'm saying right now, and it will work for you. It is something you will have to work underlying every single day, kind of bring attention to this point that our cultural norms, our ways, especially nowadays where we get so much information, we get bombarded with information of how birth should go and what is a positive birth and what is not a good birth, and all these trophies that people are apparently giving each other and giving themselves and taking it away from other people, all about birth. And I think it is really important to protect yourself from all this external stuff, so that you can recognize that not only is your birth going to be a very individual curve, but each and every time you give birth, they're going to be different individual curves. So you can't even standardize a birth process for the same woman. If she gives birth multiple times, they will all be different births. She might have some kind of experience, but they will all be different births. So I have 3 daughters. All 3 of them have had different births, right? My experience for 3 of them are different. And that's the case, you will never be able to say, oh, that's what happened in my last birth, this is therefore all my births are going to be like that. So everybody's experiences is different. So what can you do? When I say the best preparation you can do to have a good birth, and I don't use terms like positive birth or negative birth or whatever, just birth as in we are doing it as a human race for hundreds of thousands of years. The good thing is, from a medical perspective and a technological advancement perspective, a lot less of us die and a lot less babies die in childbirth compared to the times when we didn't have all these medical interventions. So other than that, birth is still the same, right? We are better protected. We have better facilities. We have better knowledge, better evidence. And so it should be even easier for a modern woman like ourselves to get out of the way when birth is happening to you. Unfortunately, I feel I echo the sounds of a lot of birth workers, that it is the opposite. The more we know, the more help and support we can get, the more we try to control birth and design it. People use birth plans and preferences and have a picture in their head of how their birth is going to go, and then they compare that with how it actually went. Well, first and foremost, it will never match. I mean, to say that it matched perfectly, I think it's even harder than finding a needle in a haystack, right? So if that's the way we will take all women into birth, we're just setting our whole womankind for failure. So I think the first thing to get out of the way of your own birth is to not have these set expectations and be open to a lot of scenarios, including birth might be very painful for you, including you and your baby might need help and support. And the good thing is you're most likely to get it. So being open to that. And also the other way to get out of your own way is to physically get out of your own way. Now this is important because this is where my core, dare I say, expertise lies, right? I'm an exercise physiologist, so I understand movement, and I have since the past 8 years moved into this field of perinatal exercise and movement and birth exercise and all that sort of stuff. And so I think that physically, the way you can really, really support and help your birth is there are a few golden rules. First is to spend your pregnancy being quite active and being mobile. And by that I mean a very, very simple thing. Don't sit down for more than 20 minutes at a time. I mean, nowadays we've got really nice fancy watches and trackers and stuff like that you can put a little alarm that'll buzz and say, hey, you've been sitting for 20 minutes. These texts can be quite helpful. So I highly recommend moving a lot. And I don't mean that you should go for a pregnancy yoga class or a Pilates class or a gym session or something. All of those are fantastic, but that's not what I mean. I mean being mobile, being able to move your hips comfortably, because those are the things that your body will want to do at birth in order to fit your baby in the right place at the right time in your pelvis and coming out and all of those things. And the physicality of birth. Birth is very physical. It's very intense. And if you are not able to take that intensity of the physical aspect of birth, you will find yourself in a hard place. So again, you won't be able to support your body the best way possible. And I draw parallels to if you were to join a race, something that is quite challenging to you. It could be 5K, 10K, whatever is challenging to you. And you decide to just turn up at the start line on the day of the race and run. As opposed to weeks and months in advance, you go training, you build up the resilience in your body, you build up the way your body can actually take the assault of that much physicality that's going to come by building your muscle strength, your muscle endurance, your flexibility, the rest, the hormones that come in, and everything that goes along with the physical aspects of any kind of work. It's the same thing we do at birth. We just expect women to turn up at the start line without any practice or preparation, and then we moan and complain that they are asking for painkillers. And look at them, birth is natural. How come you want painkillers? It would be exactly the same if an athlete or a person turns up at the front line without training. They would be on their back screaming their heads off wanting an epidural, guaranteed. The reason they are not doing that is because they've put the effort in. So if you try and run a race without putting your heart and soul into the training, you will find yourself wanting pain relief, right? So one of the other ways to kind of be well prepared for birth is to be physically as active as you can. There is no harm to your baby if you become strong, stay strong, become strong, build up on your strength. Your placenta can handle your exercise as long as you don't do crazy amounts all in one day. You pace it. You, like everything else, you build up slowly. You can. And the other thing that any kind of movement does to you is gives you, and this is really important, awareness of your body in space and time as it moves. For people who have spent a lot of time sitting down and have not experienced the subtlety of the way their hips move, their torso moves, their pelvis moves, or when their arm reaches out, or when they squat down, how it is to navigate those spaces, it will become very hard at birth to go into those kind of spaces that your body will want to. So one of the things that we do at the pregnancy yoga class is we kind of use a lot of rounded hip movements, because I say that in the modern times we've engineered these kind of moving in a kind of a rounded manner out of our lifestyles, because we are walking a lot, we sit on the desks a lot, we are not down in the fields and turning and twisting and picking the bales of hay and passing it on to the next person in the queue. All of those things that make us sway and move, unless you're a professional dancer or do things professionally, most of us will not have the repertoire of those movements in our body. But that's what at birth your body will be crying out to do, because it will want to move. As I say, your baby will want to shimmy into a particular place that will make things easier. But there's also another thing to it, not just the fact that you haven't had the opportunity to experience that and you don't have a mind muscle link to those kind of movements. The other barrier you will have is the cultural barrier, the barrier of inhibition, right? If you are not used to gently swaying yourself in a big rounded hip movement slowly, and if your partner's never seen you do things like this, your brain will start to work subconsciously at birth and say, maybe not go into this position. You don't know how to lose your inhibition. So somehow by doing these things before birth, even perhaps, with your partner, in front of your partner. So if you're both sitting down in the evening, you just sit on your ball and you move your hips, or you go on your hands and knees and just move your hips in a nice round manner, just exhaling as you make a sound from your throat. All of those things, if you do it with and around your partner, they also become used to what birth sounds and movements look like, and you will not feel inhibited by those kind of things as and when they happen. Because our brains are very good. If you feel conscious about doing something, no matter how desperately you want to do it, culturally we are designed to kind of not do those things. So I always recommend to people that just go on your hands and knees and sway and make big round hip movements, or sit on the ball and move your hips, and do it all the time. Do it around anybody. If the midwives come home, just do it around her, or if your kids are around, let them see you do it. It makes a big difference in the fact that when you're either at the hospital or wherever you are giving birth, you will not feel that inhibited. That means, once again, you are getting out of the way of your birth. What that means is, if your body wants to do a particular thing, but culturally you're inhibited by it, you are the one getting in the way. So by doing these things beforehand, you're getting out of your own way and letting birth happen to you. And this is so hard for us modern people, to let go of that sense of control. What would we rather have? We would rather have an app that tells us our contractions lasted for 30 seconds and now it's coming every 3 minutes. That makes you feel a lot more in control than, I don't know, I just feel like moving, or maybe I'll rest, maybe I'll go and have a little sip of something, maybe I'll put on some music. That doesn't tell the modern calculating and not analytical brain where you are at in your labor. But if in a book, in a somewhere, they said that if your contractions are coming that often and are lasting that long, you are X or Y or Z centimeters along. Or maybe I'm 4 centimeters then. We want this numerical feedback. And again, the problem with that numerical feedback is it lights up a part of the brain that should be shut down at birth. So let me go a little bit into that aspect, because this is really important and really cool to a great degree. But so you have a part of your brain that starts has kind of come along before we became mammals and before we became humans, and so the reptilian brain, if you want to give it a name, but it's that limbic system where all the information is so under the radar of your consciousness that you don't even know you're picking it up. You don't know why you're walking down the street and something is telling you call a taxi pretty soon or get out of here or something, and you don't know that hunch, that feeling, and it's all this sensory information that it acts on. And it also gives a lot of autonomous instructions to your brain, to your body in how to react and how to feel and what to do. Should your blood pump faster? Should your heart rate go high? Or should you relax? And all of those things. So without your knowledge, your brain is making you and your body do a lot of things. But as we became more and more nuanced and we evolved into the humans that we are today, we started to grow a part of the brain that not a lot of other mammals have, and especially certainly not in the size that we humans seem to have a massive brain. It's this the front part of your head, the brain. This is the prefrontal cortex. Does a lot of analytical stuff, likes a lot of language, for example, is comes from a development of this brain. So talking, using words, counting, analyzing things, putting things in order so that you can come to a logical conclusion. All of those aspects or functions are coming from areas in your prefrontal cortex. But they don't really work very well with the most deepest aspects of your physiology, such as giving birth, right? So when you talk numbers, your prefrontal cortex just lights up like Christmas tree. But then that's what will make your limbic brain go a little bit slow, because this very bossy prefrontal cortex is taking over and telling you that 3 minutes and 4 minutes and lasting for 30 seconds and 5 centimeters dilated. You give the prefrontal cortex some numbers and it loves it, and it's all lit up. So the little part of your brain that feels and just, explores and senses the world, because it's a quiet personality, let's just give it a personality, it slowly becomes shy and kind of becomes quiet, because it assumes that this very cool, numerical, analytical, loud person can take over, right? So when you do that, again, you're getting in the way of your own birth. So I recommend, and again, I always tell people I can recommend whatever the hell I want to recommend. You shouldn't follow it till you've gone away and thought about it, read about it, heard more people, and heard it from good evidence-based sources that maybe what I recommended is sound. But what I generally recommend people to do, counterintuitive to a lot of recommendations you might find, is to not use apps, is to not count your contractions, is to not worry about how dilated you are. Now that's the point where you're going to interject and say, but Rahana, that we need to know how dilated we are in order to ring the hospital. How do we know when do we need to ring the hospital? And you might be very right, because the hospital too interferes and gets in the way of birth by asking such information. But as I said earlier, the reason they need to do that is because they need to create some kind of standardization timeline for all women, and it might not be an exact, in fact it will never be an exact timeline for you personally, but it will apply to most people in the population. So now you want to look at all that population stuff that the hospital does and asks and demands of you, and bring it down to your individual level and say, what is helpful to me? And the way to then think about your labor, if you decide to say, okay, I do think that Rahana is making a bit of sense here, maybe I will explore this non-numerical way of birth, one of those ways in which I suggest that you can get out of your own way in giving birth, then just kind of letting that intuition, this is ramping up, I need help, I think I need to go to the hospital. So what that way of going to the hospital will do is it will give you a personalized feedback into when you need to go to the hospital. And let me explain what I mean by that. At 4 centimeters, you personally might not feel anything. No pain, no discomfort, and you're fine. But if the hospital says that at 4 to 5 centimeters you have to go in, you will feel obliged to go in. On the other hand, there might be a woman who at 2 or 3 centimeters want a lot of help and support. They might need paracetamol, they might want gas and air, they might know whatever it is, because for them it's too much. Well, then they should be in the hospital. Hospital people might, if you go at 2 centimeters and say, I want epidural, they are more likely to say, no, you've got to wait a little longer. But then nobody will let you be in abject pain. They will try and support you through that pain, even if that means giving you some help and support, whether it's verbal or pharmaceutical or whatever, and even if that means asking you to go home and rest for a bit longer. What's the worst? You'll go to the hospital twice or 3 times. I always think that listen to yourself. If you feel you need help and support, go and seek it and ask for it. So if you tell your partner, I think I need to go to the hospital, you can just go there. But at the same time, for a lot of us who feel like, I think I can handle it, just because I'm 4 centimeters, I don't think I have to go. Now, the other thing that the hospitals want you to come in at a certain centimeter dilation is because you want to be at the hospital when you're fully dilated, and, when birth is really into the throes of it's going to happen any minute. Unfortunately, though, there is, again, no... it's a bit like financial investments, I say. Past does not predict the future. So what I'm trying to say is, if it took you 10 hours to go from 0 to 2 centimeter dilated, it's not going to take you 10 hours to go from 2 to 4. It might take you half an hour. It might take you another 2 days. But just because it took you X amount of time to go from 1 centimeter to whatever centimeter, you can't just double the time frame for doubling up the centimeter. It just doesn't work like that. So you could go to the hospital and you might be there now for a long time because things don't ramp up. Or you might get to the hospital just in time and make it. Or you might not make it to the hospital. All of those scenarios have happened, right? And happens on a regular basis. But if you trust yourself and you listen to yourself and you let your body, your mind, and the headspace that you have created guide you, and you get out of the way, with your numbers and analytical stuff and your apps and this, and you get out of the way, your information that you're going to get, the feedback you're going to get from your body and your brain is going to be a lot more useful to you than just listening to the numbers game. So that's my recommendation in terms of getting out of your own way. And then another way to get out of your own way is to be receptive to help. So the problem, and the reason I'm trying my best to make this a bit more succinct, because there is a problem we have at the moment, culturally, socially. There seems to be 2 kind of camps. The hypnobirthing, water birth, fairy lights, baby slips out and the mum just cooing and not making a sound kind of birth, to the mum who says, I want an elective C-section, I need to know exactly what I'm doing. And those are the 2 extremes. And actually, birth is everything in between. And you will have some form of experience somewhere in between. You might have this one or the other experience, of course, but it'll be a combination of a lot of these things. So if you want to say, for example, you go down this, I want a water birth, I want natural pain relief, I don't want epidural, I don't want this, I don't want this, I don't want, and I want baby to slip out, you somewhere become closed to receiving help. Or you might be close enough till the very last minute till you give in and you say, all right, I will have an epidural, or okay, I'll have an emergency C-section. You agree to it, but it will feel like it's not your empowered decision. And unfortunately, you'll come out the other end with a lovely baby and beat yourself up for having had to accept that help and support when you actually really needed it. So again, one of the ways of getting out of the way of your own birth is to be open to help and support. Now, this is a dual-edged sword, because on the one side, I say accept help and support, and on the other side, I'm quickly going to turn around and say the exact opposite, saying that we have become a bit of a society where sometimes, for the sake of policies and procedures and hospital stuff, help or certain kind of interventions, I should say, are offered more than they should be offered. So, for example, induction. Certain reasons inductions are offered. If you, in the olden days, women used to give birth in their 20s, and they weren't as fit as we can be now in our 30s and 40s, or not just physical fitness, but all sorts of, health wise and just generally the world we live in. We're more able to give. We are in a better condition at the age of 35-40 than a 35-40-year-old 100 years ago, right? So but the policies and procedures have still lagged behind. 40-50 years ago, it was very rare for a 40-year-old to give birth, and now it's becoming more of a norm. So if the policy says if the mother is 40 years and over, and if her pregnancy progresses to a certain point, say beyond 40 weeks, we need to offer her an induction. That's the policy, but you might not need an induction. Your baby's fine, you are fine, everything is healthy, and you're just going to wait it out till birth is going to happen. So that is where you need to say no, thank you. And each one of you, you will have your own different kind of decisions, and there is no way we can talk about all of those aspects of those decisions in this generic session. But as much as I am saying be open to help and intervention and support as you need it, I'm also saying be aware of interventions for the sake of interventions, and knowing that subtle difference. It's not easy, right? It's not easy to the most informed of us. I do this for a living, and it wasn't easy for me. Any of those decisions that I've had to make across 4 pregnancies, 3 children, I'm telling you, none of them were easy. At every stage, I had to make a decision about, should I accept this help and support, or should I do nothing? They were loaded decisions. So don't think that they will be easy decisions. They will not be, but you will have to make them. So here's another tip from me. Don't beat yourself in hindsight, which is 2020, about the decisions you had to make under certain situations, certain conditions, certain stressful spaces of, or time sensitive decisions you would have had to make at birth. If you said yes to induction and now in hindsight you think, maybe I should have waited, or if you said yes to C-section because your labor wasn't progressing, you were tired, and then they came and they offered you C-section, you said yes, and now you've listened to a lot of other stories and you've questioned that decision, it's a deep, dark hole to go into, and it's a hard place to climb out of. So during birth preparation workshops, I don't even leave it to postnatal. I talk about these dark holes, postnatal dark holes, that are not worth going down. And that is another way you can protect yourself and make yourself stand by and watch your birth rather than, tell yourself what you ought to do. See how it unfolds. And the way you will be able to make those decisions to the best of your ability at that time is by being very well read, well informed, as much as you can. Talk to a variety of people, talk to as many different opinions as you can, read good evidence-based sources. All of those things are going to help you make those decisions under very stressful situations. And I will repeat, and you will still not get them as perfect as they could have been. Nobody can. Your doctors can't, your midwives can't, nobody can. You have to have compassion for yourself and for people who support you at birth to be able to have an empowered, good birth. And as you can tell, this is not hypnobirthing stuff. Hypnobirthing, well, I personally, a lot of people already know, don't like the word hypnosis because I don't think that is a correct term for what just a relaxed birth space is. What hypnobirthing is nothing but deep relaxation, right? It's not hypnosis. Hypnosis is a very, very typical, particular thing that is defined in a particular way. But I think birth, just practicing some kind of good, being in a good, relaxed space will allow you that headspace to make good decisions, to be able to take care of yourself physically, mentally, emotionally. And that's what it's all about, right? If someone calls all of those good relaxation stuff hypnobirthing or anything, it's the same and it's helpful. So I'm not saying that whatever hypnobirthing is not helpful. It's very good and it's very powerful. It's all helpful, but it's not the only way in which birth is great or good. Birth will be good if you have a nice, broad attitude to birth. If you have a healthy attitude, a non-adversarial attitude to the people who come and help you and support you at birth. So let me talk a little bit about that as well, because again, that becomes part of the hypnobirthing tribe. That a lot of the hypnobirthing stuff will, say all this stuff that your body wants to do, your mind wants to do, everything. That is the best way. And if someone is coming and trying to give you some kind of medical help or intervention, question them and ask them why they need to do this and da da da. And I just feel that kind of conversation is a very adversarial space to be at birth, right? Yes, at some point, if you need to do that, you might have to do that. But again, if you're going into your birth with an open space, open mind, then it's okay, right? You will be able to do that in a positive way. But if you go with this mindset that I want a vaginal birth in the water, a baby slipping out while my fairy lights are on, and if anybody who comes in my way suggesting another option, I will put up a fight with them before I listen, you're automatically creating an adversarial headspace, which is not good for you. Never mind the person who's doing a day job. So that's not going to be helpful. If you say, I'm going to give birth and around me are people who've been trained, yes, sometimes they're very rigid in their training, who are there to support me, who are skilled, and we will work together. And somehow the decisions will happen. If I don't understand something, I will ask again. And if they patronize me, I will remind them in a very positive, confident way that they can't talk to me like that, right? So a lot of the times women say that they feel quite patronized. Medical staff treat them like they won't understand anything. Well, I just say that's just like life, isn't it? You go somewhere and somebody talks you down and you have a way of dealing with it. You yourself personally, you can say, I'm not putting up with this. I will just firmly stay my ground and tell this person in a very respectful manner that this is not on. You can do the same at birth, or you can let your partner do the same at birth. You don't need to draw daggers out. And I think this is the problem with wanting a birth a certain way. You will, metaphorically draw those daggers out, and that's not helpful to anybody either. So again, getting out of your way by saying, help, I'll take help when I need it. And sometimes those decisions, in hindsight, I would have done a different job. But hey, the space in which I have to take those decisions, I will not beat myself up on it after it's passed. See, all this I'm saying, and in the back of my head, there is a voice that says, but what about the mum who is being wronged? But what about the mum who genuinely needed a different way of being treated? And if you have those concerns, I totally get them. But if you go in with that attitude that you will be wronged, you're more likely to feel that way and you're more likely to behave that way. So because we can't control any of this, my attitude to this is go in there with a friendly attitude to your care providers and see where that takes you. Because I'm pretty convinced that the other way of fighting your way out of this is certainly not the best way, but that's me. And there are a few other things from a physical point of view that might be worth kind of talking about. Is there are different stages to labor. So the contractions and, all of those things, they feel different things are happening. So the dilation, we just talked about 5 centimeters dilated and 7 centimeters dilated, all of those things. Again, those numbers mean they're a bit, different things for different people. Centimeters, not the ruler centimeters you and I think. Because the way people measure centimeters is they put their fingers in your vagina towards your cervix to kind of get that feel. And most of them, because they're professionals, they can get more or less, but they'll never get an exact, number anyway. And this is why I'm saying that getting your brains all fired up because I'm 5 centimeters, I ought to be feeling this, is not going to be conducive for you and that calm sense of space that you're after. As you progress towards a number more like 10 centimeters, and again, this is 10 centimeters a little bit here and there, but more or less, just imagine a 10 centimeter circle. And that is really the kind of space that a baby's head can now pass through. So that's what we're really talking about. Fully dilated means a space in your cervix. Your cervix is opened up enough that your baby's head can now come through it. And that's what it is. Now, it could be 9 centimeters for you and your baby, or it could be 12 for somebody else. Once that has happened and you are what would be considered as fully dilated, then your hormonal space completely changes. Because now at this point, your body is going to expel the baby out, as in just throw it out, right? And by that, it means the whole way in which your labor changes. You're going from a nice, relaxed, contractions are coming, everything is okay, to being in a very, very intense space. Adrenaline is pumping, and you're going to get forceful feelings in your uterus. And that change can sometimes become quite fearful for a lot of people, especially there's a technical term for it called transition. This is when you're transitioning from that cervix opening. So every contraction you get is, hopefully not every, but as your contractions are coming, they are slowly opening that space in your cervix at the mouth of your cervix, right? But when your cervix is fully dilated and now your baby's going to bear down, the space is very different. So your hormones do a little switch, a little shift change, if you like, and you start to become very alert, and all of those things, because you're kind of not really in a kind, you're somewhere in your head, and you're somewhere in your body, and you're somewhere letting everything happen to you. You're not very aware, so suddenly starting to feel a bit anxious because your body is a bit pumping with a bit of adrenaline can make you feel very confused. And these can be funny times, and these can be scary times. So there are women, I did a little poll a while back on my community of women, and I said, come on, tell me some of the strangest things you've said at birth. And now that you look back, do you think those happened more or less around the time of transition? And people have come up with the funniest things. And you've heard stories where people have said things like, or a midwife would say, the lady who was in labor, she'll start putting her shoes on and say, I can't do this anymore, I'm going home. And you kind of think that's funny. To people feeling really scared and really vulnerable, and not knowing what to do, and finding themselves in a really dark place, and kind of really feeling that sense of fear. So again, like all the experiences I was telling you about, this transition is also very personal. For some people, it can be a fleeting moment, it'll come and go. And for others, transition can last for, minutes, hours even. And it can just be a very hard place to navigate. But then once you're fully into that second, phase where baby's coming down and baby's finally born, it is the most intense part of labor. Some of us might want pain relief more strong than gas and air and paracetamol. Some of us can, think about the breathing techniques. And again, there are no techniques as such with breathing as well. It's more, I'm going to go back to my favorite phrase of you getting out of the way in which you breathe as well. So what by that, if you've done a lot of movement or breath work, as you move, you've allowed your body to breathe a certain way that's conducive to your movement. The same thing will happen at birth. You will breathe more conducive to what your body needs at the time. If you tell yourself, I need to employ my dove feather breath now, well, you've kind of taken over, haven't you? So you're not moving out of your own way of birth. You are now bossing around, telling your body and your mind how to breathe. But that's exactly what I've been saying all this while. Try not to do that. So any books, techniques, whatever, courses that teach you to breathe a certain way at a certain point in your labor, I think are doing disservice to you. Because if you have to switch and think, what part of labor am I in now? So what breath technique will I use now? Well, you've lost it, because you haven't given the control to your body and your mind to do what it does best. However, during your pregnancy, if you've been naturally squatting down, some of us like to breathe out when we sit down, when we squat down, and then breathe in as we get up. But for some of us, it is the exact opposite. We breathe in the opposite direction, but that's because individually that works for you. But if I come in from the outside as a yoga teacher and tell you, breathe in like this and breathe out like this and do this like this, when you move your hand, do that, and when you move your legs, do that, that dictation takes away that empowerment that you will have to let your body and your breath and your mind decide what is a good way to breathe. But you can only do that if you have really practiced your breathing throughout pregnancy. I mean, obviously I say even before pregnancy. So if you're doing any kind of classes or breathing or something that you have practiced, then it'll be very easy for you to be out of your own way at birth, because you can trust your body to breathe the way it needs to. Your body knows all the different ways in which to breathe in different scenarios. You don't need to say to your body, you have just crossed transition, now you need to employ breath number 68. It doesn't work like that. So another way to get out of your own way is to do your breath is very, very powerful, right? It's one of the most powerful mechanisms you have to influence your involuntary actions. So fear, for example, that is quite involuntary, feeling fearful. But the way you react to feeling fearful, you start to breathe short, shallow, quick, fast, right? And that's when your brain says, oh, I must be feeling fearful. I will employ all the hormones that will make me run away from here, or, crouch down or whatever. You can trick your brain. You can use breathing that you would have naturally done if you were calm. If we are all calm, we naturally don't tend to breathe very fast and shallow and sharp. Our breathing tends to be slow and deep and quiet and long. Especially the exhalations go really long. Well, why not trick your brain by breathing like that? And therefore your brain then assumes, oh, your breathing is relaxed and calm and long, you must be relaxed. And therefore all the hormones that kind of happen to float around your body when you're relaxed, that's what happens. So you can, decide what's the horse and what's the cart, really. And that work you can't do at birth. You've got to do that in pregnancy and before. I mean, if you haven't done it till now, start now. But you can't do that at birth. You can't walk in, never have done any kind of good breathing technique, and then start to boss around your body and your mind and say, employ breathing technique X or Y. And I'll say the same thing about body postures. There are a lot of charts, aren't there? In fact, some of the charts are there in the hospitals themselves. Good birth postures. So many times people come to my workshops and I ask them, what do you want to learn in this workshop? And they say, I want to learn postures for birth. And I say to them, well, explore your body. Learn more about how your pelvis works. Learn more about the strength that your thighs can give you, so that if you want to squat at birth, because that's what your body and your baby is asking you to do, you can. If you want to go and hum your breath out because you've done it before, if your body needs it, it just calls upon it. You're out of that, you're out of the way. You're not interfering. Because all that stuff, the kit of birth preparation, happens a lot before, and then you let go. If you are able to do that, if you're able to kind of have this mindset, and you go in with this attitude that I am going to just work about not being too controlling of birth, and let my body that is designed to do this, that knows what to do, I carry the knowledge and the skills and the experience of generations of grandmothers and great-grandmothers and great-great-grandmothers inside of me, and I will know, my body, my mind, my head, my baby will know what to do, when to do it. And if I need some help and support, unlike my great-great-great-grandmother, who could have died because she was in a hut somewhere and had no empirical evidence, I am much luckier than that, and therefore I'll be in good hands. My child, my baby will be in good hands and will be okay. To me, that's a good birth. Because when you come out on the other end, you won't be second-guessing yourself. You won't be comparing your birth with that of another mother you will meet in a breastfeeding support group or in a coffee morning. You will be content in the space of your own birth, because you know, just like you are an individual, and you can't compare yourself with a lot of, with other people. Just like you won't compare your baby with a lot of other people, you won't compare your birth with other people. Why do we do this to ourselves? Because it's never going to be comparative, but yet we do it. Because socially, social media has given us so much information recently, in times when we couldn't meet and all those things. But at the same time, it does make you feel very isolated and in a space where things are comparative. So maybe if you work a little bit on that aspect, that will really help. Read, listen to good stuff if listening is your thing, whatever. Go and get that information that is evidence-based, that is correct, that is, you understand how your body works, you understand what you can and can't control at birth, and then you walk into birth well informed without having to micromanage your birth. I think that's all I've got really to kind of insist on. Watch the experience, enjoy the experience, and the one way you will enjoy the experience is if you will accept the experience. If something goes wrong and someone needs accountability, certainly, like everything else, if someone takes something away from you, you don't let that happen. You stand up and you make a noise about it. Well, you can have that faith that if something doesn't go correct or someone has knowingly harmed you or your baby, you will address that. But going in with a more relaxed, calm, friendly attitude than an adversarial attitude will give you a much better experience of birth, and whatever it is that your birth will be. Vaginal, cesarean, anything in between, forceps and ventrus and whatever you might need at that time. You might say yes to, and it might be a good thing. I always say, and I do say that, it's a very lucky place we are in. And feel lucky, feel lucky and you will be lucky. So I hope I've given you something to think about and something to consider before you go for your birth and into your birth journey. But if you have anything that you'd like to share or, tell me about it or ask me, please feel free and I will try my best.